Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Well, our Sedra this week is Bo, Exodus 10, verse 1 and following. There is so much that demands to be admired, celebrated regarding Egyptian culture. Think about it. For example, like the Valley of Kings with its royal tombs, this vast area is one of the world's most magnificent burial grounds, and it was used for over a period of 1,000 years. And the great Sphinx of Giza, half lion, half human, is one of the most recognizable statues in the entire world. And the Aswan Dam, built across the Nile, is a source of economic blessing to Egypt as well as a source of environmental catastrophe. It is the world's largest embankment dam. For 30 centuries, Egypt was the preeminent culture in the Mediterranean world. Because of its location, its size, its wealth, major wars seemed to easily find their way to Egypt's borders. The Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the Germans, and the Israelis. Besides its pyramids and temples and obelisks, the Egyptians also managed to invent a calendar, a system of mathematics, papyrus, a writing system known as hieroglyphic, systems of irrigation, and so on and so on. A lot of stuff. But Egypt has also found itself immortalized in the epic story of the conflict between the God of Israel and Pharaoh, considered by his subjects to be the embodiment of a deity, a god against a god. It certainly was my experience as I visited the massive and chaotic and wonderful Egyptian museum in Cairo, to find myself looking at the stunning products of Egypt's history and creativity and genius, while at the same time, in my little head, trying to figure out what it was that Moses and Aaron saw when they entered the fabulous palace of Pharaoh. Entered that palace with a demand that eventually brought one devastating plague after another. Shai Held wants us to try a thought experiment. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, we're going to imagine a world. Stay with me. Imagine a world in which cruelty were indifference to human needs and feelings were a total disregard for anything but one's wonderful own ego-driven needs, resulted in having the world of nature judge us and turn against us. Imagine such a world where the cosmos will not remain indifferent to the evil we do, where the linkage between immoral behavior and painful consequences, the linkage between human failings and human suffering, is unfailingly effective. Wouldn't that be a great world, where wickedness would be immediately punished? Very appealing. But in other ways, living in such a world for some people would be an absolute nightmare. Pharaoh was going to meet this kind of world. He didn't know how to handle it. And let me be clear. We're talking about Pharaoh in Egypt in the book of Exodus, but we've encountered this Pharaoh many times over history. Indeed, we can meet him today. How do we describe this Pharaoh? Okay, doesn't like aliens, those who are not native to his Egypt. As his kingdom expanded, so did the number and variety of his foreign captives expand. An earlier Pharaoh even had Jacob and his family sequestered in an area called Goshen, and that, my friends, I firmly believe was the first ghetto that ever existed in human history. You know what this Pharaoh knew? Aliens make great slaves. There was little else good about them. They made good slaves. And this Pharaoh, who existed once and often, This Pharaoh is anxious about so many things. When this Pharaoh saw the Israelites' slaves increasing in number, he saw them only as a threat, not as a source of promise or as a way of strengthening his kingdom. He drew his people's support by stigmatizing the other, the foreigner, treating the foreigner as a kind of a fifth column, waiting for the chance to overthrow his monarchy. And this Pharaoh then, and over history, doesn't like to accept the truth, no matter how clearly it is demonstrated to him, if that truth challenges his personal view of his status in his world. If that's what truth is, forget it. This Pharaoh was cruel, indifferent, and unmoved by the pain that he brought to others. Blood, frogs, lice, hail, darkness, whatever. His people were in anguish, and there's no sign in the book of Exodus that he cared one whit. Even when his own son died in the 10th plague, he relented only briefly before he pursued that which he cared the most about, the humiliation and defeat of those who would dare to oppose him. This Pharaoh then, and across history, was manipulative. He broke his word without a backwards glance. He had no shame. This Pharaoh in Egypt and over history is a con artist. And he seemed to believe that no one would ever notice. I won't let them leave Egypt. I'll let some of them leave Egypt. I'll let some of them go part of the way, on and on. Pharaoh was paving his way through life with a clutter of broken promises. Pharaoh, the master of death in a kingdom that celebrated death, had no concept of the power of life. Held will quote the prophet Ezekiel, who imagines Pharaoh brazenly announcing, "The Nile? My Nile is my own. I made it for myself." That's Pharaoh. That's how he viewed it, ego. Pharaoh's limitless self-obsession was understood to be the unraveling of all that creation stood for. In such a world, the Torah had no trouble linking Pharaoh's behavior with immediate and direct punishment from God, horrific penalties. In such a world, God was quick to turn nature against someone who turned against human values. So, let's clear this up. Was this Pharaoh a mythological figure, a literary creation, or was he an historical figure? Scholars differ. Readers differ. I suspect that believers don't differ. For myself, I believe that the figure of Pharaoh throughout history to our own day is absolutely real, even though he was much more of a mythological figure than a factual figure. It is absolutely true, my friends, that narcissistic leaders do occur, deaf to the needs of those they lead, reacting only to their ego's call. It is absolutely true that there are leaders who thrive on building up a disdain, a hatred, a fear of those who are somehow different, of the other, the alien, the stranger. Such leaders intuitively know that stoking such a fear among their people is certain to strengthen the support of their own people, because xenophobia in history to our day is a winning strategy. The Torah wants us to know that such leaders may at times reap the penalty for what they have sown, at times, but not always, maybe not often. So we cannot blithely trust that nature will ultimately take care of anyone who flouts the values, the principles, the instincts that ought to govern life. Held makes clear God's activities as an administrator of justice. These activities are not all clear or certain. And that's where we come in. That's where we come in. When we see a reborn Pharaoh in our day, we can't deny what we're seeing. We can't ignore the potential impact of what we're seeing, and we can't rely upon nature or God or any other force to resolve the problem before us and to remove and punish the transgressor. That reborn Pharaoh in our day is our responsibility and no one else's. Exodus chapter 10, 1 and following, the Sedra is